Welcome to the Master Your Mix podcast, helping engineers, producers, and artists create professional recordings and mixes, even from home. I'm your host, Mike and Davina. Let's get started. Hey, welcome to the MasterYourMix podcast. My name is Mike and Davina, and thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Today, my guest is Andy Reid, and if you're not familiar with Andy, Andy is a record maker, musician, mixing engineer based out of Bay City in Michigan. He's worked with artists like Eric Johnston, Leland Blue, Tom Iscariot, and in this conversation, we have a really fun chat about producing solo artists. And this is one of the things that Andy does a lot of, working with artists that are starting with just a small skeleton of an idea for their songs. And then Andy helps them develop their songs, turn them into full productions. And he does it really, really fast as well. And in this conversation, we talk about his process for that, what goes into that, and how he works with these artists so that he can make these sessions run as smoothly as they do. Because as you'll hear, he doesn't like using templates and stuff like that. So it's not like he's starting from the same starting point every time. He's actually building it from the ground up for each project. So there's definitely an art to being able to do that really quickly. And that is something that we get into in this interview. So with that said, I know that there is so much great information in this podcast. So I'm just really excited for you to dive into it. So let's just jump right into it. Andy Reid, thank you so much for being on the MasterYourMix podcast. How are you today, man?
I'm doing great, Mike. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. No problem. Of course. For people who might not know you, your story, how you got into music and how you got into production and mixing and all the stuff that you're doing, can you give us that background?
So when I was about 19, I started playing guitar and playing in bands. This is about 25 years ago. And I'm in Michigan. So the music scene here and there has flourished, but the White Stripes thing was kind of on the horizon and all of that. But I was in a little power pop trio called the Haskells, and we had gotten a little bit of financing from a small independent label in Michigan to go make a record. And we had heard through a friend's band that Brendan Benson, who later was in the Raconteurs and with Jack White and all that, and he's a great solo artist. He had released a record on Virgin in '96 that was like one of my favorites. But we had heard that he was recording, just doing the recording studio thing and producing bands. So we reached out to him and we started making a record with him, and it was just, tape machines, vintage microphones, all the stuff all us nerds want to see. That kind of made me fall in love with the record making process. I kind of had no idea it was that way. And ever since then, I bought a 4-track and I've had 8-track reel-to-reels and the little all-in-one 16 digital tracks before making my way to Pro Tools. And so that was about, I've been doing it professionally probably, this is year 16 of my studio that I'm working on now. So it's been kind of a full-time gig for about 16 years. But that's the short story of it, just still learning, still playing in bands over the years and just trying to perfect it. And as you know, the more that you learn, the more you realize you need to learn, so it's I've become a lifelong student of the craft, but I still love it every day, coming down to work and pushing buttons and trying to get weird sounds.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, before we started recording, we were just talking about how, there are so many resources out there to learn from these days. And it's like, continuing to learn new things. Like you always surprise yourself with what you don't know, right? And there's so many things you can try and learn and just go deeper and deeper with it. And I think also part of it is that the industry is always evolving too. So, different trends in music production are happening. And so sometimes it's like, well, how did they get that sound? And then you start to dive deeper into that rabbit hole of like chasing a sound or whatever. And I think that's just like part of the way that you keep on top of the industry and on top of what is considered like a, radio ready song these days, like what goes into those things. And, it's not always like one way to do everything and that's it, right?
Yeah, I love that about it. Like, I love that there's exciting new music being made in a way that's completely the opposite of how I'm used to doing it. Like, I've always been like the singer-songwriter band guy where it's like we mic it up and we hit record, that's kind of just the way I was, brought into it. But like Billie Eilish and her brother Phineas are making these records in their bedrooms with cool samples that they're kind of doing sound design on their own and really getting in there and crafting the sonics in a really unique and clever way. And it's great. I mean, I love that I'm learning stuff from 19-year-olds, so it kind of keeps you, keeps you on your toes. It gives you something else to work towards. And it always makes it interesting, at least, so even now that the tools are so affordable and you can get a plugin that does 30 different things, and you can sit there for hours with one plugin, for crying out loud. So it's creatively, it's amazing right now. It's the most kind of like fertile time I've ever seen,
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and it's kind of funny. It's like, the more we kind of talked about this on some of the other episodes too, but it's like the more you learn about this stuff too, the more you start to like create some like self-imposed rules on yourself sometimes. And those rules can also be restrictive, right? And so when you start to see like what other people are doing, sometimes it's like, well, they're doing the complete opposite thing of what I've been told I should be doing, and like that's just how you learn. Like, oh, that's a cool approach there. Like, I got to try that, and keeps you on your toes.
Yeah, and having like sometimes I'll get hired because of a record, like I did, and then I kind of have it. You kind of have it in your head that's like, okay, I got to get the drums to sound similar than that, and that kind of thing, and then you're kind of. It's like, well, did they want me because I was creative with sounds, or did they want me because of those sounds? So you gotta kind of go in with an open mind and still keep that the idea open that you don't have to do the cookie cutter thing. You can get a little weird if you want to, and I think part of it with my attention span is that like I don't have templates and I don't have any of that stuff. It's like I don't know if it's. I can't do the same thing twice, or I just have a hard time going to the same thing over and over again. I just want to try different things to see how they sound and work. And I think because of that, though, everybody has their own unique sounding record. It's like there's not like one staple sound that I kind of work on. It's like every single thing is kind of specifically tailored towards the artist and the song. So that part's fun for me because it's not like the same thing over and over and over each day, and that can get a little tedious.
For sure. Well, that makes sense too, and it's interesting. I'm always amazed when I hear people that have been doing this professionally talk about how they don't use templates, because I feel like that's kind of something that a lot of people start to get into. The busier you are with it, the more people tend to template things to optimize their processes. So I'm curious to know, if you're not using templates, what do you do to help keep your sessions like as efficient and fast as possible, so that you're not, spending all that time doing all those tedious tasks?
That's a great question. So I do have like my inputs and everything all wired into, because I have all outboard preamps and compressors and EQs. So I have like 18 channels just set ready to go kind of for whatever. And my drums are always plugged in, and I'll always put up a couple of crazy weird mics through pedals or something like that. So I can get going pretty quick with any instrument. So on the creative side, when we're actually working on songs and recording, I try to have the sounds ready to go as close as possible. And then when we're done with the tracking of that particular part, I'll just do a little carving, reverb, whatever, and kind of get it close to almost the way it's going to be mixed. So when I get to my final mix, I have everything kind of dialed in a little bit, and it doesn't take me, and I like that too, because every decision we make after we do those one parts is it's affecting the next thing we record. So when we're building a track, it's nice to hear how it's going to sound, and then when we add something, we know it's going to work in the mix, and the next thing, if it's going to work in the mix, and so on and so forth. So, because if you have like a high piano bit and then you want to add another high sparkly thing, it's like, well, do we really need that other high thing? Because the piano's kind of covering that ground. And if you can hear it, they're kind of fighting for territory, So things like that. I feel like kind of getting the sound on the way in, getting it as close as I possibly can to the mix helps the decision-making process for the next things we add. Because I work with a lot of solo artists. So I should have clarified that, because they'll come in and I'll be the guy that like adds all the other instrumentation. So, we're building these songs together as like if we're the band. So it's nice to be able to do the drums, dial them in. Okay, we want that kind of drum sound. So now we know it's like, okay, we're taking this in a 70s kind of vibe thing or whatever. So then every decision we make after that goes in that direction. So that's kind of fun. It's kind of, we have no idea what it's going to sound like when it's done, but if we make these decisions together and the artist is approving these decisions, even though I'm the person playing them, it's kind of nice because they're still involved in the production side of it. And that's a lot of fun. And they're getting their own kind of custom thing. So
that's cool. Yeah. So you're typically tracking things like one instrument at a time and building from there, right?
Yeah. Typically, most of the time, I do bands. I have done, I would say probably 4 out of 5 are definitely solo artists that I work with, because I'm doing the producing and the engineering and helping with the arranging and stuff like that. And a lot of these artists, they've never played in a band. So I like that process immensely because I can ask them questions like, well, who are your favorite bands, and then try to give them something that would be that they would listen to because they like Wilco or they like Bob Dylan or whatever, So that's kind of fun. It's just kind of like we're exploring together, trying to figure out what their identity is as an artist. And that's super rewarding, because they walk out smiling, just hearing their song like they never thought it would ever sound,
For sure. Well, yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I know so many people that do tend to record one instrument at a time. Maybe it's just because of limitations of working in a home studio and not having the space or the inputs, that kind of thing. And so I am curious to know when you do start getting those tones. Let's say you're starting with drums. I don't know if that's your typical starting point, but if you're starting off with drums, like how do you make those decisions knowing what it might sound like in the end? Like how are you shaping those sounds at the source without really knowing how it all builds together, right? Like, is it just your experience has told you over the years, like I typically carve this or I do that kind of thing? Like, is that how you've learned to just get things right at the source from there?
Well, I mean, I already have everything kind of set to a spot where I can kind of take them into like a more roomier thing, or I can kind of open up the drums and make them a little ringy or dry them up and stuff like that. But what I'll typically do is, we'll start with doing like a scratch guitar to like a shaker or a drum loop, right? And then we'll discuss like, should we make this build here? Should the drums cut out here? We'll kind of map out the drum part together before I even play it. So it's not like, we have the arrangement. We've talked about the dynamics that we want in the track. So then I can kind of play them. Or if it's something really technically challenging, I'll bring in my friend Donnie, who does a lot of session work for me on drums. And he's phenomenal. So then I can kind of treat the drums. I can kind of do a little more on the way in that regard. But if I'm playing them, I kind of have to play it a little safe, like I can't really go super hard with the compression and stuff like that. Then in post, I'll kind of work on it and carve them out and decide how much verb to add and all that stuff, or how much room to add. So I have a good, safe starting point for myself. And then I can kind of go from there with plugins and so forth with the mixing side. Because, yeah, like you said, there's only so much you can do, when you're monitoring, and then I'll even have like the artists have to go in there and just hit levels for me, Yeah,
I was going to say, recording your own drums is a hard thing to do.
It is, yeah. So I kind of just have to find a sweet spot on the pre and get my mics. Like, I know where my mics need to go at this point. I've been in the same room for so long. So it's like I can kind of like, I can put mics on set levels and not have to hear a thing to get like a good drum sound. So that's kind of nice. And that's experience for sure, just knowing that if I want something with brighter cymbals and stuff, I'll put my small diaphragms up. If I want my big fat drums, I'll use my Coles ribbon mics as overheads. That's about the extent of my decision making with drums, is like the type of overheads that I use, honestly. But it works great, but I do have to tend to play it on the safer side sometimes. And I'm in a really small room, so it's like I can't. My drum mics usually just stay in place too, so that's kind of convenient.
Yeah, well, I mean, it kind of goes to show your level of experience where you're making those decisions based on like, do I want a brighter sound? I'll use the small diaphragms. Do I want a darker sound? I'll use the Coles. Like, that just shows that you. have that experience of using the gear and being able to identify like how big of a difference those things make, so you can quickly get a sound going. And yeah, I'm sure you kind of mentioned the idea of like listening to other musicians or other references. Doing that will give you also kind of a sense of where to go with that kind of vision for the song, and who the influences are. And you can pretty easily pick out in other recordings, like, okay, they went for a darker sound, they went for a brighter sound. Some of those big picture kind of things are easier to identify. You might not be able to know the exact mics that they use, but you at least can have a sense of like, okay, well, I need to find a darker sounding microphone. What do I have? I need a brighter one. What do I have? So
yeah, and also like trying to know like that a Levon Helm feel is different than a Ringo feel, is different than a Bonham feel, like all those different things too. So if they want something specific in that sense, then I know the musicians to come in and fill those gaps too. So that's important, knowing the different styles of all the different drummers that they are listening to. I'll even, before, we'll have like a pre-production meeting, I call it. We'll just go have dinner and have a drink or something like that. And I'll just ask them, what kind of records do you love? Like, what do you like listening to? And if I hadn't heard the records, I'll go and listen to them, and get a sense for like, oh, those are really fuzzed out guitars. This is going to be fun. I never would have guessed that. So doing a little bit of homework beforehand helps a lot too. And then if that also helps me to know if I need to hire people, like if I need like an awesome piano B3 player or something, it's like, okay, I have a person for that. So I'm going to need that for this project. So it helps.
Absolutely. Well, another thing you had mentioned earlier was the idea that you tend to play on a lot of the records that you make. And that was something that I noticed when I was looking at your discography, was that you're often credited as a musician on most of the records that you make. So I was curious to know, how those collaborations come together. And, it's you kind of maybe answered it a little earlier because you tend to work with solo artists. But I was going to say, are you playing on records because people can't play their parts, or is it just more like a collaboration thing where you're working as a songwriter with people?
Yeah, most of the people that come in are just like they'll play their main instrument like a guitar or piano, and then they sing. So I kind of have to fill in the gaps with the other stuff. I am a bass player and a guitarist, as those are my two best instruments. But I can kind of fake my way around a keyboard and the drum kit a little bit. I'm a very good editor with drums and Pro Tools, so I can get in there and hack up a drum take, and then they listen back and they're like, you did that? That sounds way better than what it sounded like in the room. So yeah, most of the time it's with solo artists, and when it is with bands, what I try to do with bands is kind of fill in the blanks. So I want to let the band do their thing. I want to let the drummer do his thing, and the bass player do his thing, and the guitar player. And then I'll listen and be like, okay, what's missing here? Okay, this could use a B3 part in the chorus. Here, I'll just play it real quick, and stuff like that. So I'm just kind of like an additional member in that situation. But when it's just me and a solo artist, it's definitely like I end up playing a lot of the stuff, basically just because I've been playing them for so long, and I'm the guy in the room that can kind of play it. So. When it comes to, but I should clarify that even though I'm playing the part, I work out the part with the artist. So it's like, so they're helping me compose the bass line, and they're helping me compose the auxiliary guitar parts and stuff like that. So you know what I mean? Like I want them involved in it. I just don't want like my go-to style or whatever it would be to be on these records. I want their signature on it. Even though I'm playing it, we're writing them together. We're writing the parts together. So that's important to me, because it's like I don't want to take over the project and have it sound like an Andy Reid solo record. I want it to sound like their record.
That's fair. Yeah, it's interesting because I do feel like my experience in working with singer-songwriters is that there's a wide range of people being prepared, right? A wide range of the preparation that they have going into these things, right? Like there are some people that just know, okay, like I want my album to sound like this, and I can play all the parts. I'm maybe just a guitar player, but if you give me like a bass or whatever, I can play all these parts in. And it's like, cool. Then you're just like an engineer recording someone's ideas. And then there's other people that are like, here's this acoustic song I have, and I want to turn it into some like full blown pop production. And I think it takes a specific type of engineer or producer to work with those kind of projects, because you clearly have to have that skill to be able to play those instruments and play those parts and, write with people that way too, right? So it kind of sounds like you're doing a little bit more of that side of things, right?
Yeah. As much as I always just wanted to be an engineer and work on huge consoles and have 50 pull techs and all that stuff, I am a producer that has engineering skills. You know what I mean? Like I've accepted the fact that I am a producer that has the ability to record at a decent level. And so, and I just know that that's where my skill set lies, and I think it is just because from being a songwriter, I think it's from just being a fan of so many different styles of music. So I can kind of tap into so many different vibes and stuff like that. So I think that that's important to know that most of the stuff that I get now, if not all of it, it's not because I have a studio. It's because they want me involved in the music making process, and then I document it in my studio. So,
gotcha.
It didn't start out that way. It's definitely started out as like, setting up microphones and having everybody come in and then I'm like, okay, what do you want to do next? Are you done with that song? Like, I wasn't even thinking production yet. I was just thinking like, do you have all the stuff you need for this song? We can move on to the other one, so. But I actually enjoy it this way. I really like being involved in the music making side. I think it's been a lot of fun, and you're kind of in a different band each day kind of thing, which is super fun. And I never know what's going to happen. It's like every day is just different. So that it's been enjoyable getting to that spot where I can say that I'm a producer that engineers, even though I wanted to just be the nerdy guy that pushed buttons and wore the white lab coat.
For sure.
And work at Abbey Road.
Of course. Well, I mean, you're right, though. It is kind of the idea of like being in a different band every day. And that kind of does make it a little more exciting, a little more refreshing. And, that's not the same thing every day. And I also think that, it's cool that you were able to acknowledge that your production chops are actually the thing that people keep coming to you for, because that is just a skill in itself that differentiates you from the classic or typical engineer. It's like you're the guy to go to for that kind of thing. Like I've had people come to me. I'm a drummer primarily. I don't play guitar very well or bass very well, and so like if someone comes to me being like, "Here's an acoustic song, turn it into a full-blown pop production," personally, I don't feel like I'm the guy for that, right? But it's like it's great to know that there are people like you who have that experience and that are like, yeah, that's what I do, and I think that really does differentiate you from someone like myself or a lot of other people, right? Like we each come to it with our own strengths, right?
Right. And I think that's huge. I know like we were talking about there's with your listeners is that like, everybody's getting into this and it's like almost to the point where we all have the same set of tools, right? With the same software available and all that stuff. We can all pretty much achieve the same sound. So it's like, how are you going to separate yourself from the herd? Because otherwise you're just going to get lost in the shuffle. So it's like you recognize your strengths, you work on those. And I guess I never really realized how much the engineering side depended on like the production side, going back to like the Beatles case. It's like, Jeff Emmerich, when he was doing, Sgt. Pepper, they almost listed him as a producer because of like the sounds he came up with were so vital to the production of that record, and you marry those two things together and, they really just overlap so much. It's like, here's the guitar part as the musician. Okay, now I'm going to set it up as the engineer. Okay, now we're going to produce the part together. It's like, it's wearing different hats, but I don't notice I used to notice when I'd get into different mode, like I'd have to turn a key and just switch to engineering mode, then switch to producer mode and then switch to musician mode. And now they're just a blur. They just they're all together and we're just working on this stuff together in the room with the artist. I don't sit there for 10 minutes and search for a guitar sound. It's like, we'll get the guitar sound and I'll put a Unidyne 57 on the preamp mic or on the guitar amp and then just get a good level and then we're going. Back in the day I would have spent 20 minutes just moving the mic around on the cone. You know what I mean? Like it's just like I just want to keep the session moving while we're being creative. So try not to let the technical side get in the way as much as I can, because I like it's crazy. But we'll try to do a song a day. Like someone will come in at 10 o'clock for the session and by 4 o'clock we'll have the song done. And I love working fast like that. But also I have all my inputs up, like I said before, and so we can just get to work on the creative thing and not have to worry about the tech, like spending 2 hours getting drum sounds, For
sure. It's interesting too, because there, to your point there about like how you used to spend so much time moving around a microphone. It's like the more you do this, the more you kind of realize that there's like a general starting point for all this stuff that is going to work 90% of the time, And then, if you want to like get picky with like, let's roll off a little top and I'm going to move the mic a little off to the side, that kind of thing. You can do that, but like you can agonize over that stuff all day, right? So it's like, just when you start to realize like those like basic starting points, like you can get good results right away with that. And so sometimes in the interest of just making your session run smooth and efficient and fast, like just using those starting points gets you there. And then, I mean, there's also something to say about when you have consistency like that and you are kind of starting from those same points, it allows you to like know what's going to happen in the mixing stage a lot easier too, because you've already corrected those mistakes, or you've already corrected those things so many times that you kind of just instinctively know, okay, I got to fix this, I got to do that. So it helps you work a lot faster, I'm sure.
Yeah, and it's trial and error. I'll have days where I call them just like lab days. So I'll put an amp up and then I'll grab 6 microphones and then I'll just record a little bit of each one and just be like, oh, that one sounds a little cooler for that kind of tone. So I do have days where I'm still trying things just to see what they're doing. And then before I know it, it's like now I have 3 go-to mic choices for electrics. It's like if we want this kind of thing, this mic handles high gain stuff better than this mic. So it's like I can make those choices super quick. Boom, put it on the cab and it's good to go. So it's important, I think, to know the gear you have. I'm sure everybody knows this, but it's like. It's so hard because this plugin world, I'll buy like 2 plugins and they'll sit in my folder for a month. And it's like before I used to sit there for like 6 hours with each plugin and try it on everything and see what it can do inside and out, And I know that the technical side can really get in the way of the creative side a lot, especially in this day and age, like you said, with all the choices we have. It's unlimited and it's insane. But it's also just unlimited possibilities, So that's the fun part.
Well, I love that you said you give yourself like a dedicated lab day, because that's just like fun learning day. That's like the things that you've always wondered if you can do. Try it out, like then you learn those things, right? And I feel like that's something so many people don't do. It's just like they're so focused on just getting the job done, and then maybe they're like, okay, I'm done this project. Like I don't want to spend any more time working on music. Maybe like obviously enjoy your life and do all those other things outside of work, But like it is good to just also spend the time and actually experiment and have fun with it and, fall in love with it again, if you find that it's getting like a little monotonous or something, right?
Yeah. And luckily too, I have amazing clientele that will let me get away with some of that while we're in the session, but I don't want to hold up anything either. It's like, man, I always do like 1 fun mic per overdub. So I have one that like I know is going to work, and then I'll just throw something through a pedal and I'm not all the time, but like a lot of the time I will. And then it's like, dude, 80% of the time, 90% of the time it's unusable, but that 10 to 20%, it's kind of fun. It's like, dude, that's that crappy, phone mic I put on the floor in front of the kick drum. Listen to that thing, or whatever. And that always gets, I always feel like I don't want to say it's putting on a show for the client or the artist, but it's like, I love being there and almost like saying, oh, that failed. Like, okay, I'm failing here, whatever. Showing them that it's okay to try things. It kind of gets them into that mode of like, yeah, okay, well, Andy's trying stuff and he's been doing this long, and he's like, oh, and it sounded bad? That's cool, but you just got to be comfortable with failure, and you got to be comfortable doing it in front of other people. And if you are, then that's when everybody's brain turns on. It's like, let's have some fun here. We could really get some weird sounds. Will they all be usable? Probably not. But if you get one or two great things out of it that are super unique, then that makes your record even that much more special. And I think that's important. But it's like you said, that all stems from those lab days too. Like, oh man, I just got this new mic and I thought it was going to be a snare mic, but it ended up being a great, bass cab mic, whatever. It's you just never know. And I know that there are go-tos like, 421s for toms and that kind of thing, or staples or whatnot. And those are all great, but it's like I love buying a microphone and finding it works on something else from what I intended it to work on, Mm-hmm. Like I just bought a Sony 37 clone, the Mojave one, and this has always been a dream mic for me, And I'm like, this is going to be the best vocal mic ever on everybody. And I'm like, dang it. I sound awful on it. Like I was hoping that I would sound great on it, And I'm like, crap. Put it up in front of the drum kit. It's like the most 3D thing I've ever had in a room. And I'm like, oh man, this is perfect. So you just never know until you try those things. And that's the beauty of it. I think it's a lot like the microphone and the mic preamp. I always use the guitar and amplifier analogy. It's like, you got a Fender Strat with a twin reverb is going to sound different than a Les Paul through a Marshall full stack. That's the same relationship with microphones and preamps. So you try those different combinations, you can get so many different colors,
For sure. Yeah, and I love that too, because like so many mics I find have a reputation for being like the perfect mic for X, or whatever, right? So people buy these things thinking, well, that's all I'm ever going to use it on. And they don't even experiment with it to see what you can get away with. And it'll blow your mind sometimes, like what's possible. I recently, even from one of my memberships, we were doing a microphone shootout, and I was just testing out like a whole bunch of mics that we had in the studio, just on everything. And it blew my mind, like how versatile a 57 is, like I always knew it. And like, I've always done it on guitars and on like snare drum, that kind of thing. But like to try it out as an overhead mic, or like to try it out as a kick mic, you're kind of like, shit, this is actually kind of usable, Like if that's all you had.
A vocal mic, dude. Yeah. I mean, they're amazing mics. I just got into like the Unidyne 57s. I bought a couple of those, and it's like, man, I'm just hooked on 57s. I'm with you. It's like, it's the Swiss Army knife. It really is.
Yeah, totally. If I had like 8 57s, I'd feel totally comfortable just like using them on everything, like having a whole drum kit of 57s, and I'm sure it would sound great.
Easily make a record with all 57s. Easily.
Yeah. But I love that, and it all comes back down to just like those lab days and spending the time to just experiment and find those things that maybe you didn't think would work, but you tried it and now it works. I even remember like being in college, and our one of our engineering teachers, he would say like, don't use condenser mics on drums, like on like kick drums or whatever. And I was like, okay, like I guess that's his approach, And then like the first day I worked at like a studio, it was like, okay, so we're gonna put the FET 47 on here, we're gonna do that, and I was like, I was told we weren't supposed to do that,
Yeah.
And it's like, but it works. It sounds amazing. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, but like, yeah, some of the rules, or quote unquote rules that exist are kind of silly if you think about. I mean, I understand like, you got to be careful using a delicate ribbon mic on a vocal, because the air could pop the ribbon. There's things like that exist for a reason. But I was going to say too, I also still kind of work on my own music, and those are sometimes my lab days too. So I kind of still set aside a day a week, having a client in, and I'll either work on one of my own songs, or I'll do a lab day, or they're combined, because I'd rather screw up on my own time than with someone else's dollar. You know what I mean? So
makes sense.
Yeah. But it's also like you said, I think I quit doing those days for a while, and I was miserable. Like I'm just going through the motions, and I'm just like, oh, this is this, sitting here complaining. I can't believe it. But it's like, I needed those creative days to kind of reconnect with the craft. It's like you need to stay connected to it. Otherwise, you're just, going through the motions. And you can't do that when this artist is entrusting you with their baby, essentially. So I feel like it's important. That's my way of connecting to it.
For sure.
And then everybody has their own way to do it. But yeah, once I started doing it again, I'm like, oh yeah, this is why.
Yeah. I agree with that. And I think it's, for most people listening to this, I think a lot of musicians have that experience of having gone into a studio and just being surrounded by all these like knobs and lights and stuff like that, and it's like mesmerizing and fascinating, and you're just like, ooh, it's like all this like this foreign world that like you're interested in. And I think that's how a lot of people get into this stuff. And it's like, take yourself back to that moment and remember that like at that point everything was new to you. It was all about learning. It was all about experimenting and like trying something or like figuring out how this works, and it's like, just because you've been in the studio doing it every day for a while, it doesn't mean that magic to it needs to be lost. You can still have that fun and reconnect with that like intrigue of trying something new or trying a different plugin. I love what you said earlier about just like spending hours just playing with a plugin and seeing what you can get away with. Or like, I've even spent days where I'll shoot out all of my 1176 plugins and just be like, why are these different? Why do I have 30 1176 plugins,
Exactly.
And then you realize, oh, okay, this one actually has a use for this. One sounds better with this. This one's got some weird low end thing to it, whatever. And you find those go-to things, and now you are excited about it. You're excited to use these tools, and you find a new use for it, right?
Yeah, that's the beauty of where it's at right now. I mean, like when I was starting, it was an SM57 with a 1/4-inch cable on it into a 4-track. That's all I could do until I figured out I could plug into my guitar amp with reverb and then mic my guitar amp. It's just that little extra thing that gets you another 1% or 2% or whatever. And there's just in the technology changing, like you said earlier, is another thing that kind of keeps you on your toes. You hear some weird sounds out there and you're just like, what is that? And I still get stumped listening to things like, how did that happen? And so just that, being a music fan first, I think is important in my case, because I still have that sense of like things still freak me out. Like when I hear like Ryan Freeland is one of my favorite engineers because he just captures bands in a room just so well. And I'm like, he'll release, like he did like the last Amy Mann record mixes, and it's just like, put my headphones on. It's like, oh my, how does he do that? And I'm like emailing him. I'm like, okay, dude, come on. You got to tell me how, whatever. and the nice thing is too, is like a lot of these people that I look up to are so accessible now, and they love answering questions. I mean, everybody in this audio world is so nice and welcoming that you can talk to anyone at this point and they'll help you out with a question. And I think that's the coolest part. The audio community itself has really become like like its own family. And I never knew that even existed either. It's like I kind of go to these conferences and I hang out with my friends, and then we'll have another 2 people come, and then they're our table grows each year. And it's like, this is like my family away from home. It's so much fun. And and you're with like-minded people too. It's like, I'm sure, you and I could talk every night for 3 hours and not blink twice and not like repeat ourselves, because we love what we do so much. And, I'm not around a lot of people in Bay City that have that same mindset. So when you're around other engineers and you're able to ask questions and they're picking your brains and whatever, it's just like so much fun talking this kind of stuff, man.
I mean, that's why I started this podcast. It was the same thing, right?
Yeah.
It's just like, let's just talk gear about this. Let's just talk about gear and let's hang out with cool people and have fun learning all this cool stuff, right? So yeah, I agree. The audio community is definitely very open, and it's just a matter of putting yourself out there. And I think that's just a fear thing that a lot of people have. They just feel like, oh, if I send off an email or whatever, I'm never going to hear from this person, or I'm going to get rejected by them or whatever. It's no, just take your chance, try it. Why not, right?
Well, and also, like, it's that inferiority complex that just, I think all of us as artists have. Like, it's just like, okay, why am I going to send this mix to this person and have them critique it? Because it's like, oh man, they're just going to rip it apart. And it's like, well, to get anywhere, you kind of want them to rip it apart. They're not going to be a jerk to you. They're going to be like, okay, the guitars are amazing. Did a great job on the vocal, maybe bring this up a little bit here. They're going to give you like constructive criticism. The greatest engineers on the planet, I've never seen one of them be mean to anyone that's willing to put their art out there for them to hear. And that's pretty impressive.
Of course. Yeah, I have a coaching program where I help out people and do a lot of like, I walk them through my process, but also I'm constantly reviewing their mixes and giving them feedback on them. And it's funny because I'll check in with people after a little while and we'll just start chatting about it. And, I'll be like, kind of, what were some of your hesitations getting into this stuff? And people are always like, oh, I'm just kind of scared of like sending people my music to listen to. And it's like, yeah, but how was it? Like, I helped you out with this. Like, what was it like? And everyone's like, yeah, it wasn't like once I did it and I realized like, you're not mean, it's like,
exactly.
I actually got something very valuable out of it. Right. And it's like, that's just how it is. It's like, you just got to put yourself out there and try. And from that, there's a lot of great stuff that you can learn and take away from it. Right.
Yeah, and we were there. Like, we know that feeling of being scared to do it. It's like, so we can sympathize so much with the step that they're taking by doing something like that. So it's impossible for you to be mean. You know what I mean? And you get to a certain point where so much of it is subjective. You know what I mean? It's like, well, I'd push the guitars up. It's like, well, you might send it to another engineer that's done just as much. Say, I'd bring the guitars down, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
At a certain point it gets to that. But when you're dealing with the basics of like, okay, your mix is a little cloudy, there are some technical things that I think most people would do. This is what I would do, that kind of thing too.
Yeah, there's certainly fundamentals of, like the volume things. That's the subjective part, but it's the clarity side of it that exists no matter what. You have to always make sure you're focused on that, and that's certainly something that I always talk about with my students. I'd love to go back a little bit go back to the singer-songwriter thing, and when we were talking about how a lot of people come to you, they do come to you with just kind of those bare bones ideas. And I'm curious to know, like, what is your starting point with those? Because you said you work pretty fast from the sounds of it. Like you said, you do it all in a day, which is surprising because I think some people would spend a whole day maybe just working on writing the parts, So how do you start and, what's your normal process look like for that?
Yeah, well, first they'll kind of come in and they'll play the song and I'll be like, you feeling that tempo? What if you slowed, we'll get the tempo down because I'll listen to the lyrics and if it feels like they're rushing through their lyrics a little bit, I'll say, let's try slowing it down, whatever, just feeling it out. And then work on an arrangement, because if they're just a solo act, they might not consider instrumental breaks and stuff like that. And I'm like, well, we're only at 3 minutes, so we could probably throw an instrumental moment in there somewhere, stuff like that, and just kind of build like, the first hour is definitely like building the structure of the song, the arrangement, the tempo, that kind of thing. And then the rest of the day is like, working on the groove part of it. And sometimes I'll sit here before I even play the drums and play like a fake drum part. Like, what do you think of this? Okay, what about this? What about this feel? This is a little more Latin or whatever. And just give them some options to really listen to and see what's striking them as what they want. And then just kind of going from there. Bass is probably my easiest thing to do. I can kind of knock that out pretty quickly and just, record it and play it, 15, 20 minutes or so. But yeah, it's just a little bit of chipping away here and there. It's like, okay, what do you think we need next? What would be good next? So have them laying down that scratch guitar and scratch vocal is kind of the first thing, like getting the form and getting the tempo and all that stuff and building a map. I always just call it, let's build a map, let's build a map here. And then, so I kind of capture it like just in case that is the vocal, but I always seem to get a better performance when they are singing at the end of the day, when they're hearing all the stuff that's going on, and now they can sing to the emotion of the track. it's different from having a band where they can sing with the emotion of the band live, right? And sometimes you can get that first or second take, but in my situation, they were kind of singing their song for the first time with this new arrangement with all these bells and whistles. And I get a little bit of excitement there because they're really happy and they're listening to this thing that, it's new to them, like they might have played this song a million times already, but they're hearing it this way for the first time. And I can usually get a good lead vocal towards the end of the day, and then, work on harmonies and stuff after. So usually the order of operation in a nutshell is arrangement, building a map, then work on groove, drums and bass, and rhythm guitar but they might already have the rhythm guitar part. So I'll even kind of work the groove around that if I can. And then, extra stuff, keyboards, harmonies, and percussion and stuff like that usually come last. So just getting that main rhythm bed and feel is definitely the first thing I'll record.
For sure. And yeah, it's not like you're completely starting from scratch. You are starting from at least a vocal generally and some sort of guitar part or some sort of melodic element, I'm sure, right?
Yeah. And sometimes I can get a lot from just the way they're strumming it. You know what I mean? It's like, so much of the feel is in the way they'll strum their guitar. And I'll try to feed off that as much as I can so it still feels like that same emotion they're getting when they're just playing it by themselves,
Mm-hmm.
So trying to listen, trying to stay open-minded. And then if something needs like, if something occurs like they're singing a similar melody in the chorus than they are in the verse, then I'll kind of step in and say, okay, here's an idea. Like, what if we try to switch this up a little bit so the chorus elevates? So try starting up here vocally when the chorus hits. And I'll only kind of interject when I hear the possibilities of making something stronger or it needs to happen kind of thing for it to feel more verse, chorus, or whatever. But I'll try not to, if it's there and I'm feeling it, I'll just stay hands off on all that stuff. And I'll be like, your arrangement's great. Your chords are great. Your melody's great. Let's go lay down the scratch, that kind of thing. And that happens a lot because I work with some pretty good writers.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. I think there are some people that just are that want to get into doing more of this kind of like production side of things and writing stuff, but maybe they're just like, not sure how to start, whatever. But I guess, that's the right approach to have. It's just like, let's just start from what you got and, let's add one element here. Let's see how we feel about this element. Let's add something else. And you just you're building this thing up, right?
Yeah. And the nice thing is working digitally, you can try things later on that you might, it's like, you know what? Now that we have all our stuff, I feel like we need one more big chorus or something, and you can just edit that in. It's crazy. So you can use Pro Tools as a production tool and arrangement as a production tool. So it's crazy how much fun it is. And when you're working with artists that, what I've learned to understand is working with artists, it's hard to explain things sometimes. So it's like, I'll do something and I'll let them hear it. And I'll say, okay, we can do it this way. Listen to that. We can do it this way, listen to that. We can do it this way, listen to that. And then they're able to listen and then make their decisions, where like if you have a band member, it's just like, that's their decision, So I feel like trying things, laying them down and letting the artist hear them or hear what the potential of the tune. That's why I even said like doing the fake drum track, like just doing kick, snare, kick, snare, or whatever. They're able to kind of hear the groove in a way that it might be occurring on their song. And if they like that, okay, I'll go cut it, and
Mm-hmm.
it's sometimes, and you can make things like even just a string arrangement. It's like, well, we'll get real strings, but let's map out the parts now and write the parts. And you can get great string sounds and get that done in a hurry. And it's crazy the amount of stuff you can get done and how fast you can do it.
Of course, yeah. Especially like with all these software instruments, like the MIDI packs are so good these days, and you can get very believable stuff. So
I know I haven't turned on my analog synths in like 4 months because it's like I got some of the of the Arturia stuff. And it's like, oh, I got like 4 presets I made, and I'm just like, I just go to those 4. It's like, well, I could plug in my real Model D, but then I got to turn the knobs, it's like, and they sound the same. It hurts so bad to say it. I was such an analog snob for so long. And now I'm like, I don't care. Whatever's going to get me there quicker and it's going to sound good,
Yeah. Well, I mean, the good news is that it's at some point, if you want, you can always sell off those things and you still have the sounds, right? And
exactly. Yeah. They still look good in the studio.
Oh, yeah,
so it's kind of like, they're a little dusty, but I mean, the certain band that wants that experience. And that's another thing that we haven't really tackled. That's kind of a huge part of what I love about doing this is like, I had such a great experience and such a fun time in all of my studio situations when I was in a band. It's like, I want to make that experience happen for them. It's like, I know that the finished product is eventually what they want, but it's like, but I want them to have a great time in that 5-6 hours we're making that song. So sometimes it is plugging in analog synth into a delay pedal rather than just using a thing and saying, okay, all right, when I say go, turn the release time up, like we're doing something tactile and we have stories to tell. And it's like, I always use the analogy, you don't go golfing to say you shot a 84 or whatever. You go for the 4 or 5 hours of being out there and having fun. And I really emphasize just us having a good time doing this because it'll just be so much more rewarding. And I think that comes out in the music too. You know what I mean? Like if 2 band members are arguing the whole time, I'm going to listen to when I hear that song, I'm going to be like, oh my gosh, it could be the best song on the planet. I'm just like, those guys would not shut up, and like I said, I just want them to have a great experience. And that's important to me because, I've had some mostly great experiences, but I've had some negative ones too. And it's just like, I don't want anybody to spend their hard-earned money and have a negative experience.
Of course. Yeah, and I agree with you about the synths and having the hardware ones. It's like sometimes just even walking into an environment where there are these like physical tools, it's inspiring for a lot of people too. And maybe they've played with the software versions and then to actually see the physical thing, it's like, holy shit, this is it. I've always, people get inspired by it, right? So it's
100%. Yeah, and if that inspires their performance, I'll plug them in. I don't all day. You know what I mean? So yeah, absolutely. I have a bunch of small tube amps and they'll be like, oh, I've always wanted to play one of those little, Alamo cheap amps. And I'm like, well, let's fire it up, and then it inspires their playing, all of that. And that's why the dialing it in too, like we talked about earlier, is important to me because I want their headphones to sound like a record, because when the drums are rocking and just huge in their ears, it's like you get some guys going for it and it's awesome. So if you get it to sound as good as you can in the headphones and in the room, then I feel like that really has a tremendous effect on how they perform.
For sure. Absolutely. One thing I did want to ask you about, when I listen to your work, like one thing I think you do really, really well is creating great vocal stacks. Like you have this way of making your mixes sound really big and full and your vocals just feel giant to me. And I'm curious to know, like, what are some of your tips for working with vocals and creating that size out of them?
Well, yeah. Well, first off, let me just give a little background. It's like, I'm a huge Beach Boys. I grew up a huge Beach Boys fan. So it's like, if listeners don't know, like the Beach Boys were just kind of known for their vocal arrangements, like 5-6 part harmonies and Brian Wilson, the arranger of those vocal parts would, throw in little melodic lines interweaving, and so on and so forth. So the composition of the part is obviously important to me when you're dealing with like, a standard 3-part harmony will probably be 6 vocal tracks, one on the left, one on the right of each part, so it's wider. And typically what I'll do is I'll roll depending on where it's at, you almost want to roll off more low end than you would on a lead vocal because you don't really need the background vocals to take up a lot of that low mid stuff. So you can really get them to kind of sit up nice in the mix without usually using too much real estate, and then just picking the right verb to kind of set them back into a mix. and that's for like oohs and ahs and stuff like that. So, you know, when you're, and I call those like pad, like if you were to play like a keyboard pad, like a pad stack or whatever. And then you have your other vocals, which would be like the stuff that sings along with the melody line. That might be more like a Simon and Garfunkel thing. And in that regard, you know, same thing. I think the arrangement is so important and the note choices are so important. And so when you hear those relationships between the lead vocal and the harmony line, they have their own space. And same thing. I won't need as much low end as I would in the lead vocal or body, you know. But I think if you do like 12 vocal parts in a song, you can really mud up your mix really quickly.
Of course.
You know, so the air adding, you can get away with more air because sometimes you're not singing S's and T's, which is great, you know, so, you know, just crank the 12K and just have fun with it and get some of those nice airy oohs and ahs. So yeah, I think it's just more or less being a student of those types of bands, the Beach Boys and the Beatles and stuff like that. It really made me be a vocal centric person from like day one. And I went to college and studied a lot of music theory. So it's like I was able to kind of help people arrange vocal parts and you know, make interesting choices rather than just doing the standard like, okay, here's your third, here's your fifth. It's like, you know, let's throw a sixth on there or whatever. And let's try this and let's try that. So just messing with the arrangements is really important too, because you can have 2-3 vocals sound ridiculous if the part is written in a cool way. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to say, you know, some people will just say, let's just quadruple that part. And I'm like, man, we don't need to. Let's just sing it once. Let's write another cool, interesting part with it. And it'll sound bigger because the part is more interesting rather than just layering tons of doubling and tripling and quadrupling something. I mean, sometimes that's fun too, but I think like we said earlier, the composition of the parts is the most important thing. And I'll even go as far as to say sometimes we'll wait on keyboards until we do the oohs and ahs, because a lot of times those will double in the same frequency range. You know, like you'll play like a 1-3-5 on like a B3, and then you realize you're singing the same part in the same notes. Then you can say, okay, well, let's just pan one to one side and pan one. There's so many options in that regard, but I definitely like to make vocals a priority. And I think just being a fan of that stuff has kind of made me pass that on to other people, whether they wanted it or not.
For sure. So. I mean, when I listened to a lot of the stuff you had on your website, like I could definitely hear that Beach Boys influence. It's there, you know. So you're doing a good job with that.
Oh well, thanks. I mean, you know. Yeah, everybody needs a little more Beach Boy influence, don't they? Right?
Of course. So then, as far as like those vocal layers go, like what are some of your normal like go-to starting points when it comes to layering? Like you talked about doubling and tripling and quadding, and that's obviously like a good starting point for a lot of things. But then, like, where do you go from there? Like, what kind of things will you experiment with to find like the right harmonies and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, a lot of it's a nice way to do it. And this is when I started doing it. What I would do is like, I would, because I was a guitar player first. So I would say, let's find out where the lead vocal is starting. And I'd find that note in the chord I was playing. And then I would just sit there and like, okay, well, I'm playing a C chord and the lead singer's singing the C on the B string. Okay, so let's start with the high E string. You know, like I would sit there and be like, ding, ding, and then I'd be like, okay, let's start there. And I would have to figure it out that way because I couldn't hear them so fast. Mm-hmm. I'd have to sit there on the piano or I'd have to sit there on the guitar and figure them out in that regard. And so that's kind of how I started. And I like, if you can keep things super tight, you know, like keep your intervals tight, you know, and get like, you know, if you were play the top part of a chord, you'd have your open G string, you'd have your C, and then your E. It's like, okay, there's your triad, you know, there's your 3 notes of the C chord. That's covered. Next chord, you know, and then I'd go to the G chord and then I'd like sit there and map it out that way. And that's a great way to learn how to start to do it. Honestly, like it's a really great thing to do it that way. And then, yeah, I think just my go-tos are, are just picking a nice mic that has a lot of air in it. Like I'll typically try to use, I have one of the Warm 251s, and that's a nice bright mic and just a Pultec at 10K boost. And then, like I said, that low cut, getting rid of all that junk underneath, that's a good starting point for tonality. And then once you get the part done, a great thing to do is to send them all to make a group, send them all to your own aux, and then compress them together and sometimes EQ them together because you want to treat them as one instrument. I think a lot of the impact, like you said earlier, comes from like treating them like sometimes we hear a drum kit and the kick drum might stick out too much. It's like, well, we know that person didn't treat that kit like a one instrument, and I think that if you do that, send them all to the same compressor and then use the same verb on all of them, and they'll glue together, some saturation, whatever, and just like treat them, even though they're on 12 tracks, you can get them down to a stereo pair, and then you can really make them sound, melded together.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that approach of just taking the guitar chords. It's such a simple thing for finding harmonies, because I feel like so many singers have no idea where to start when it comes to harmonies. And it's just like, they know their lead vocal line and that's it. They have no idea where to start to find other things. So I think, just even like you said, that chord idea is such a simple way to find some ideas or get that inspiration of stuff that will work, because it's literally the same chords. So, you are just creating those pads, right? So that's the starting point right there.
Yeah, it's a great way to learn. And honestly, like I'll still go to it constantly. It's just like, even if because you can play C in 4 different places on the neck of your guitar, or 5, probably a million, but, you can jump up and play at the bar chord at the 10th fret and get some higher options. There's so many things you can do with, and the same goes for the piano. And the nice thing is like when you're working with singer-songwriters, and sometimes they'll have a little bit more of a complex, but like you'll hear a major 7th, or you'll hear a 6 chord, or you hear a 9 chord, and it's like, okay, I'm going to figure out what that 9 is. I want to hear that in the vocal arrangement, so it's like, I'll sit there and figure that out on the guitar. So I just can't hear that stuff as natural as I can hear a 1-3-5, but yeah, by picking up the guitar, you can kind of figure out all that stuff. It's like, it's going to work because it's there, like you said. It's like, heck yeah, let's sing it, Yeah,
it's not going to be a dissonant thing or something weird. It is exactly what is already there. So yeah, that's a great starting point. That's amazing. Right on, man. Well, I don't want to take up too much more of your day, but I appreciate you taking the time to do this, and just some amazing answers, amazing insight into your process, and lots of great stuff that I think people should be taking and running with from here. So, Andy, thank you so much for being on. If people want to learn more about you or follow you online, what's the best way for them to do that?
I have a website, reedrecordingcompany.com. REED is how you spell Reed, and that's pretty much my one-stop shop. It's got information on my studio. It has some interviews. This podcast will be on it, some different things on the press page. It has links to all the different music I've worked on. It has a link to the band I play in, the Legal Matters, which is kind of just a studio band that I'm in. It's got a link to that page and stuff like that. And it's got the bio. It's kind of just everything's there. I do have the Instagram under Reed Recording Co. I'm trying to push the social media thing here and there, and content and all that stuff that us old folk need to keep up on.
Right on. Well, yeah, I'll have show notes for that all in the show notes, so people have links for that. Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. I really appreciate it, buddy.
So that was my interview with Andy Reid, and that was a lot of fun. I love his approach to producing solo artists and how he goes about building these songs and his approach to that, and just everything about vocal stacks. I found that really interesting, and just such a simple hack for finding vocal harmonies. I think that's something a lot of people really struggle with, and I can tell you from my own experience of being in the studio, I know a lot of singers that just don't even know where to begin when it comes to harmonies. A lot of producers don't know, and a lot of times, a lot of these singers rely on their producers to help them come up with those harmonies. And just having this simple tip that Andy shared here of using a guitar chord is just such a great springboard for finding harmonies. So definitely something you're going to want to try. I also love his idea of lab days. I think that is just such a cool way to keep the process of making music exciting and to just constantly fall in love with the process of engineering and constantly finding different ways to experiment and find different techniques to use or different mics to use. It's just such a fun way to constantly improve on your skills and to give you a whole new tool set for creating records and finding the right sounds for your projects. So yeah, that was a really fun interview. And Andy, thanks again for being on. That was amazing. And I hope that you, the listener, I hope that you really enjoyed this episode. And if you did, make sure to subscribe to it. That way you're notified about all new episodes as they go live each and every Wednesday morning. And also make sure to visit MasterYourMix.com. That is where I help out musicians with creating pro-sounding recordings from their home studios, teaching you how to go about the recording, editing, and mixing processes so that you can make the process of making your records easy. And if you've ever struggled with figuring out how to use the tools or what things to do in what order, what to listen for, that kind of stuff, that is exactly what you're going to find on MasterYourMix.com. And one resource that you definitely want to check out while you're there is The Mixing Mindset. That is a book that I wrote where inside I break down the process of mixing step by step and make it super, super simple for you. And also on the website, there are some other courses that you can sign up for if you're looking to go deeper into some of the tools like EQ and compression. And as I mentioned in this interview, I also offer coaching services. So if you are interested in getting one-on-one help with your records and really getting some hands-on training when it comes to the process and what to listen for and getting specific feedback on your specific music and your mixes, then definitely send me an email at info@masteryourmix.com. And all you need to put in that email is the word coaching. And from there, I'll get you all the information. And it would be great to collaborate with you and to work with you on your projects and help you make your music sound the absolute best it can so that you can showcase your talents in the best way possible, showcase your skills, and maybe even make a living off of your audio skills because, hey, it's a lot of fun to do this stuff for a living and to actually be able to make money off of your passions, right? So yeah, if you're interested in that, once again, send me an email, info@masteryourmix.com, and include the word coaching, and we can talk about what it would be like to work together. So that is it for this episode. I hope that you found it very helpful and very inspiring, and I look forward to chatting with you in the next one. We'll talk soon. Have a good one. Take care. Thanks for listening to the Master Your Mix podcast. To have your questions answered, submit your questions to questions@masteryourmix.com. Please go to iTunes and subscribe and leave a review. And for more information on how you can improve your mixes, visit MasterYourMix.com.